Fantastic. Well, today I'm really excited. I'm with Olga Permiakova. She is a Ukrainian-Dutch visual artist based in Amsterdam. And her work is characterized by a multi-layered approach that deconstructs reality and reframes it in new and unexpected ways. As an example, she might use digital manipulation or collage techniques to create visual illusions that challenge viewers' perceptions and expectations. I find this fascinating, by the way. So really, really amazing. And her creative process begins with theoretical and material research, which leads her to explore relevant for her themes like war, national identity, sustainability, memory, and mental health. And she uses her work to explore and comment on these ideas, which can range from personal experiences to broader social issues. I'm sure we'll dive into all of those areas a little bit. So I'm really, really excited to have you here. Thank you so much, actually, for coming on the show.
Hi, Maria. Thank you so much for having me. I'm extremely excited. It's my very first podcast, so I'm very happy to to be on your podcast, and I'm really excited about our conversation.
Fantastic. Yeah, me too. And yeah, so I guess, I gave a little bit of an intro, but perhaps if you start sharing a little bit more about you and the art that you do, and so people get a better understanding of, you and your art.
Sure. Well, I usually tend to have like multi-layered approach, and I think maybe that's how my thinking process works. And I believe that it's getting more interesting to have like very rich work, which is in so many layers can be like exciting. So it applies to more like concept behind it, but also in a visual explanation of work, so everybody can see maybe certain things which they can relate to. And of course, it really depends on the project which I work on. So usually I just have a lot of research, and then this creates this artistic process, which I don't know where it's going to lead me. So that's the most exciting part about it. And I tend to have a lot of experiments because I think that comes with my background, because my first education was in precise science, so I had a lot of chemistry and physics lessons. So I think this kind of lab period of my life is still relevant in my today's work, which is, I think, quite interesting, because I always considered that education was quite boring. But of course, the knowledge which I received, it's still there. So it's nice that it's actually adding to my current work, something which I would not have before.
Wow, fantastic. That's really amazing. And so you studied at, and you need to tell me the word, Gerrit
Rietveld Academy. Yeah, correct.
Okay. Tell me more about your background, the education that you received there.
Sure. So I think it needs to have a little bit more like background information about where I'm coming from, because so I think I was quite artistic always, but in Ukraine at that time when I was applying for my higher education, it required to have some background in like academic drawing training, which I didn't have. So that's why I felt like, oh my God, I think I'm not going to make it. So I really didn't believe in my creativity. And also, of course, maybe the circumstances were like that because the art education was completely different back then. So I applied for something which was absolutely not my passion, and which I mentioned before was really boring. So then after the graduation, I realized that, okay, I have this passion for art and especially photography, which I kept as a hobby, but I think life is too short to do something which you don't like. So I decided to start pretty much all over again. And I applied for Gerrit Rietveld Academy in the Netherlands, Amsterdam. And at that time, I think I was really underestimating how important this academy is in the art world. And I think it's one of the best art schools in Europe. It has a huge history. There is a lot of important and famous artists who graduated from that school. So I think I was really naive in a way that I was applying for something so huge, So it also maybe gave me some courage to do that. Otherwise, I'll be very doubting myself. So luckily, I was admitted, and it was actually quite easy because the approach of the academy is something which is very open and very free. So everything which you knew before, you would actually have to forget. So people who would have this academic drawing training, they were actually taught to draw with, like, their left hand instead of the right hand. And the goal, I think, was to really get out of your comfort zone, how banal it sounds, but this is still the case, and to really explore something which you maybe had never experienced before, to really broaden your artistic horizons, which would lead you to something very interesting. So you really kind of rediscover yourself. And I think that's pretty much how I would describe the education approach in the Gerrit Rietveld Academy, which I think was one of the greatest 4 years of my life.
Yes, that sounds amazing. And so, did you grow up in the Ukraine, and were you born in the Ukraine, and then you half Amsterdam, half Ukrainian, no? Both, yes.
Yeah. Well, actually, the Dutch part I gained very recently because I got Dutch citizenship after. Thank you.
Well,
After
congratulations.
10 years of living in the Netherlands.
Yes.
But I was born in Ukraine, indeed. I was born in Kiev, but then we were traveling a little bit with my mom throughout the USSR. Back then, it was a big, big country.
Yeah.
So my relatives, they are still living in Russia, in Belarus, and so somehow I was really traveling a lot when I was a kid. So I even have a little bit like a self-biographical project which I did based on that, because I found some family footage which I don't remember.
Yeah.
And that was shoot in Kazakhstan at the time. So it was quite fascinating also to discover that part, which I totally forgot. And then when I was 10, we moved to Ukraine, to Kiev, and there I finished my high school, and I finished the university. And since then I moved, and then from there I moved to Amsterdam.
Yes, yes. Wow. And in Amsterdam you are now for how long? 10 years, you mentioned.
Yeah.
Wow. And of course, with everything that's been going on in Ukraine and everything right now, and I know that that's one of your passionate subjects as well, talk about the war and Russia's war in Ukraine and Ukrainian national identity. I'm sure we'll flow into it. I know we're jumping around topics right now, but just kind of grasping of just wider topics to dive deeper into. How was it for you? How was that for you recently?
Well, of course, the war began in 2014, and then I was already back here. So everything which you hear from the news, being here, far from your home country, far from your family, always sounds very, very terrifying, because you don't know how it is in reality. Of course, in the beginning, the war began not in the whole part of Ukraine, but only in the eastern parts, and then followed up with the occupation of Crimea. But of course, there was a revolution of dignity, which happened in Kiev, and observing everything from the news and having my friends there was extremely difficult. So I was really devastated, and it took me some time before I could actually maybe put all this energy and emotions into my work, because in the beginning I just felt really lost and very frustrated, and I didn't know what to do. So it took me some time, and pretty much I think after several years, when this the war, first of all, was not really present in the media anymore, in the Western media, it was not spoken at all. I realized that maybe now it's really a good time to raise the awareness of this and the problem that is still happening in Europe. And but I decided to focus my project on women who are taking part in the at that time it was called joint force operation in eastern part of Ukraine, who came actually as volunteers, because in the beginning there was not even the right positions for women in the army. So they would be occupying some very like men positions like snipers or I don't know any other positions, but being called nurses or I don't know, some volunteers. And of course, they were absolutely not protected either. If something would happen to them, there'll be no guarantees that the government will take care of them or their families. But they were still very brave, and they were going there, and they didn't want to have, you know, this pity from men, like, oh my God, you are so weak, you're a woman, you're gonna cry over there. No, they were like, okay, we're here, we know what we're doing, and we don't need to be feeling like sorry or that we're weak. But on the other hand, they experience very like practical problems, like not having, for example, clothes of their appropriate size, or again, that they were occupying positions which are absolutely not registered even for women. So that's kind of the problems which we're dealing in the beginning. And so I dedicated my project to them. And also on top of that, of course, a very broad topic, which is war in Ukraine, which was at that time absolutely was not like widely spoken anymore. And then, of course, with the full escalation in 24th of February last year, like I think every Ukrainian person who woke up that morning from this news, like from the first message from my family was like, it began, and everybody knew exactly what it meant. So it was like a nightmare. When I woke up, I couldn't believe it, but then I watched the news and it was clear that it's actually started. So I think that was the most difficult days of my life, because my family had to evacuate like extremely fast. And so we were following them, and we're helping to, you know, just all the way there. We arranged everything, like friends in Romania, how they could cross the borders. But of course, you know, roads were already mined, some of them, because of course Ukraine were also protecting some crucial ways, so it was quite dangerous to drive. So a lot of roads were closed, and then they were like taking, I think the trip took them more than 24 hours just to get to the western part of Ukraine, which was relatively safe at the time. Yeah, so it was like to describe this in words is almost impossible, because it was so scary, extremely scary.
Yes, yeah, and I can feel the emotions in your voice, and yeah, it's something really really scary. I can only imagine, and even for just feeling into you now, I'm feeling the emotions in my body, and yeah, it's how so you've incorporated it into your work. I'm really curious how you're incorporating that into your work. I mean, of course, I've seen your work online, but I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I started working on the project about Ukrainian identity also a few years prior, because when I was visiting my hometown, Kiev, I started noticing with more like fresh eye that a lot of objects started to be painted in colors of the Ukrainian flag, namely blue and yellow. And I always fascinated with colors, so that's really caught my attention. And I just started like documenting everything which I would see in the city for the like short time when I was there. And somehow after the war began, I got so many requests to start to, like, people wanted to use my work, so for publications, for magazines, for newspaper, and I was like so overwhelmed with that. So I was not even aware that my work is finally got some attention, and exactly which I was so like loudly talking about for so many years finally got noticed. So actually my goal as an artist was achieved, but it had such a mixed feeling because of all this, you know, circumstances which it happened. And I received so many comments like, oh my God, now your work is relevant as never before. Yeah. So of course, as an artist, it was very flattering to hear, but as a Ukrainian, it gave me very like, yeah, mixed feelings, of course.
Yeah. And so to understand, you were already doing artwork about the war in the Ukraine beforehand. You were already talking about that topic, and then yeah, you got that finally got that I guess the exposure for it, for that importance of what you were already talking about. Yeah.
But then since the like full escalation, I did not produce any like new work because I think it takes a little bit time again to produce and to process, even though it's been already more than a year. I think it's more than enough time, but somehow I think maybe that's how my I don't know, maybe like just like how the brain works. Like it's when it's the right time, then it will be something like popping up. So I don't force in it yet, and I just absorbing. I think at that time.
Yes, of course, and I mean, a news like that is not something that's just very easy or something to overcome in a moment. The process, it continues, and it's a year in that sense. It's not that long as well. So yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Whenever it comes, it will come, but take your time for that for sure. Fantastic. And so you started sharing a little bit about your childhood and your upbringing. How is that I guess nurtured or influenced or inspired your creativity and the desire to want to do something with art?
Well, actually, now when I was preparing for this podcast, I remember that when I was a kid, I was always very creative, even though, of course, maybe I was not realizing that. But I remember that I was taking the boxes from like candy bonbons, chocolate bonbons, which already had like a frames. It was like a framed canvas, and I was using it for my paintings because it was kind of already framed. And luckily, my mom, she just allowed me to use the wall in the living room to expose my artworks. Oh, so it's doorbell. Can I have
sure,
a
of
little
course
break?
you can go.
Yeah, sorry.
No,
1 second. Sure. Shall we?
Yeah, we'll just continue.
So we can just maybe I just start a little bit like with the.
And then I'll
beginning.
cut it in some way that it.
Super. Yeah. So luckily, my mother let me use the wall in the living room as my like art gallery. So it sometimes felt like we lived in the museum, which was pretty fun. And then I think my fascination with photography began maybe in like early 20s, because I realized that maybe I'm not such a good painter. So maybe to use a photography would be something for me, because I still can explore and like experience like all the ideas, but not necessarily be so technical with the drawing. And then I got my first camera, and of course, you start with photographing your family, your friends. So I began with just making portraits of people I know and I love. And that also makes it, of course, very easy, because it was very natural for me to just, start making portraits. And then for the time of the art school, I really never used people in my artwork. So I really switched to something more like still lifes and some more abstract work. So I think still I don't see that many people when I work on my personal projects, but I think the only exception was for my graduation project, when I interviewed women in Ukraine, and then I still used their portraits, but I drew them from the pictures which they posted on social media. So it was kind of like still a portrait, but not necessarily directly taken by me. So I think that also describes a little bit my work, that somehow the presence of people is there, but not necessarily like directly when I take in portraits of them. Yeah. And now I just take it sometimes more for the commercial work, which I do.
Yes. So when you start to create a project of yours and you take those portraits, how's that process, that your creative process to get to the final image, I guess?
I think it's quite experimental, and sometimes I really don't know even where it's going to lead me. So that's the most exciting part for me as well, that when I start working on something, I often have maybe, of course, an idea, because my work is project based. So I have maybe something, if it's personal, then It's mostly topics which worry me or that I'm excited about, or it's an assignment. So I just start exploring the subject, and I do a lot of research, which can be theoretical or visual. And then I tend to accumulate as much knowledge as possible. And then the most exciting part begins when my thinking process just, some kind of digest all the information. And then I really don't know when these ideas will come. Sometimes they can come in shower, sometimes they can come like early morning when I'm like half asleep. And that's pretty much, I think, the most exciting journey for me as well. Because if I would sit and really force it, I don't think it will ever come. But if it comes really unexpectedly, and of course, I think being a visual person, I always, tend to have some inspiration when I go to the gallery or to the museum or watching a movie. And then it also can be sometimes a very good catalyst for my own work, because if I feel stuck, for example, and then I see some idea which can be applied to my own work, of course, not exactly precise how it is, but just to have like an inspiration, then I think that's the most exciting part of all this artistic process which I'm in.
Yes, amazing. And you mentioned the use of how you're using the digital manipulation and collage techniques to create a visual illusion that challenges viewers' perceptions and expectations. So I find that really, really fascinating. What's the usual response by people that you get from looking at your work in terms of the perceptions and perhaps expectations?
Well, I think what I tend to do is usually use some colors which are like very playful, and also the objects or like the image is usually very playful and attractive visually for the viewer. And that's some kind of the way how I lure the audience into my work, to kind of learn about something which is quite important and maybe not that happy, or like it can be a heavy subject. So, for example, war or sickness. But this kind of playfulness, I think, leads people to explore the work even deeper because they're attracted visually to something. And in terms of the like collages, of course, it's more I think just like a choice which I made working on that particular project. But of course, it's I think indeed it's working on something which is just very bright and attractive, and then indeed people, the moment they learn about what is behind this image, then of course their their perception sometimes changes quite dramatically, because they're like, oh, well, that's actually not how I imagined that in the beginning. Because I heard once feedback from my work that it was a beautiful, it was like very abstract digital collage about so it was a portrait of the female warrior, and it looked quite attractive. So the man said that, well, I would really love to hang this piece of artwork above my couch. And then I explained what is this whole thing about. And then I think he was like, okay, I will think about it.
Tell me, I guess, like, I'd love to hear, like, what's your favorite, or perhaps an artwork right now, maybe an example that you just gave, and share a bit about, if you want to and can, about the background of that particular piece and what it transmits in terms of the message.
Sure. Let me think a little bit. Because I think the most, I think one of the most like representative work in terms of like multi-layering and also very deep meaning behind it would be probably part of my gradation series, which is again dedicated to women at war. So I first of all, I interviewed women, so I found them through social media. And for me, it was a little bit challenging to have an interview with them, even though it was just mostly in the messages. But I was so like admiring what they're doing, for their bravery, for their like they're risking their lives easily. And of course, I was feeling almost like I don't know, like that I do want to disturb them too much because they're doing such an
Right.
important job. But of course, I was really flattered that they were actually willing to share what their life looks like, what is their daily life, because I was interested in quite, practical questions like how do they care about themselves. I was also very interested by the fact that if you look at their pictures, most of them have makeup. They have very well, very well done manicure. The hair was like, sometimes they're braids, sometimes there's something. So most of them have also long hair. And I was also quite fascinated by this aspect of Ukrainian women that still at war, they don't forget to take care of themselves. And I was also interested how it can be practically done. And then so they shared their secrets a little bit. Like, for example, one of the women said that when she's doing manicure, she's doing this with this half moon on her nails. So then when it grows, it looks pretty good. So
Yeah.
even like detail like this. And for me, it was so fascinating to hear like these details, which of course you would never hear from like media, or nobody's talking about this. And then about makeup, that sometimes they're doing permanent makeup, so then they don't need to worry about that. How do they wash their hair, this kind of stuff. And then when I was working on this project, I also selected the portraits which the best represent this kind of details. So if you look precisely, you can see that there is like an eyeliner, or there is like a braid, or there is a manicure. So it still gives this very like feminine side to very like strong personalities as they are. So I was really fascinated by this balance and by this contrast. And the more I talk with them, the more admiration and proud I was having. So I really wanted to celebrate women in this very like serious and difficult position which they're at, which they were
Yeah.
and still are. But actually, I have to say that now the situation in the Ukrainian army changed dramatically. So it's one of the most females in the Ukrainian army in the world. So I think that's also something maybe was like a positive change, not necessarily due to my work, but I just love to see that there are some positive changes. And I think that's pretty much the role of the art.
Yeah.
That artists have this power to speak about things which are super important, and hope for positive changes, of course.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So that's amazing how you're sharing that with me, actually giving those stories about how they are taking care of themselves and while being at war. Yeah, incredible. I guess like if you had a magic wand right now and you feel okay, like that typical Harry Potter, I guess, magic wand, and you imagine like you could just swing it and be wishing or magically kind of creating a situation that you would ideally want, what would that be for you?
For myself.
For for yourself, or for the situation that you are for the situation in Ukraine, or for the situation in the world, like whatever comes up for you for that.
Okay, well, of course, if we're talking about magic wand, I would love that Ukraine will win as soon as possible. I think that's the most important wish for everybody in Ukraine, and I think for like the past year, for all the birthday wishes, I think that was the main wish, because you don't appreciate freedom and peace like never before. Like this is the main wish, because people literally of course life will never be the same, and a lot of people, of course, like they continue living despite all this horror which is happening. But we lost so many bright brave people who lost their life fighting for their country, for freedom and for democracy, and pretty much for the peace in the world. So I think that would be the main wish, of course.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about a more like artistic vision, let's say, I think that's what I keep on doing. And that, I think we have the right to say things which we find important. And hopefully, of course, that, if we can convince at least like, one person that you want to change something, right? So you want to talk about it. So let's say like some environmental problems. So if you can, you know, address something, it will reach at least one person, and this person will, like, you know, start changing their habits. That's already, I think, a great success. So I think just, you know, keep on talking about serious issues, and just, you know, address sometimes some personal topics which I'm concerned about, which can be like very personal, but on the same time, what is personal for me is actually very like broad. So a lot of people can relate to the same thing, and that's something which I think like to do in terms of like a little bit more giving hope and talking to people through my work. So like through visual media, and maybe like evoking some feelings which they could also relate to.
Yeah, that actually brings me to that question about like, what ideally would you want for the viewer that gets impacted by your work to understand, or what's that message, or that the understanding, I guess, or touching them in some way, I guess, that you would hope for, that will be part of the change in the world, and the change for the Ukraine, and the change for for that to change I guess.
Yeah, I
Sorry,
think change is a change, I
a
think, is a very good word indeed, because we all want to change, and preferably that these changes will be positive, and like, you know, gaining peace. That's of course one of the most important positive changes which we are working towards. So I think with like everybody's input, and, you know, like the whole world with small exceptions are supporting Ukraine now, and we're getting so much help and support that, you know, which we could not dream about in the beginning. Like, you know, in February last year, we felt so like lonely, so desperate, so like I don't know, lost in a way. That's the whole world was just observing these cruel things which Russia was doing, and nobody was like in the beginning could not do much. So like, but you know, the country and people of Ukraine proved that they are so brave and they're so strong, and that they can defend it no matter what. And you know, we're facing this horrible enemy who is like bigger, like I don't know how many times more than Ukraine, and they have endless uh, human resources, which of course they don't care about. So yeah, I think that's what we're all working towards, and change, I think, is a great sum up, great word for that.
Yeah, definitely, and I fully support that, and fully want to hope to spread that message even more, so that people can perhaps connect to it in a deeper way, and be of help in some way. So I'm just looking at time, and I'm just wanting to, I guess, ask the final questions. And I mean, in terms of like your upbringing, it seems like you've already been surrounded by art. Your mom kind of created a little bit of a museum feel with the art around in your house, and you've been inspired since then, and you know, it felt like the purpose for you to be an artist and to speak about your topics was already you were already born with, which is beautiful. And then I guess, what would be something for somebody listening right now who maybe feels they don't have that creativity, or they might have a, you know, look at artists and feel like, oh, that's amazing, but you know, I'm not an artist. Like, what might be some of those things that you would want to say to them as an encouragement or inspiration, or anything really?
Well, of course, I'm still an emerging artist, so I don't have all this, you know, life experience behind me that I would be like willing to share. But I still can say things which help me personally. So even though it sounds quite banal, but still keep on believing in yourself and keep on working, because, you know, hard work eventually will pay back. And I think one of the lessons which I also learned in my school, when I felt stuck and I would come to the lesson and said like, well, sorry, like no inspiration, couldn't do anything. This is what I have, nothing. So the advice from my teachers was like, even though you feel stuck, keep on doing something. Even though you find it silly, you find it stupid, you might not even share with anybody. But the moment you do something, you get over that, and maybe on some point you will get your inspiration. And first of all, learning on your own mistakes. That's again, it sounds quite cheesy, but it's actually working. And then I think what also helps personally to me is talking about your own work. So even though you feel maybe sometimes very insecure, or you're not sure that this is something, just simply speaking, like talking out loud, you pretty much just explaining once more to yourself what you're doing. And it could be that by the end of this conversation, you will have some understanding, or you would have maybe directions how you want to continue. So it sounds very simple, but it's actually working. And I think the best would be, of course, to find some community of people who are like-minded, who you can trust, who can encourage you. And it not necessarily needs to be like, some professional artists, but also some people who you love and who you trust. But of course, ideally, I think would be to working on your network and looking for some possibilities, how you can extend like your vision, of course. And I think, keep on trying whatever works for you, because nobody is teaching this, unfortunately, in the art academy. So the only thing you are being taught is how to create art, but you are not taught how to then live your life being an artist, which has so many difficulties, actually, because you still need to pay your bills. You have to find a job which would pay that, because of course you cannot be very successful. Of course there are some exceptions, but usually you start like from the beginning, and it takes time. And you should not, I think, push yourself too much, because when the time is right, then you will get your audience. But of course there's a lot of like ups and downs, a lot of disappointments, which are part of the life of an artist. So despite how difficult it is, you still have to believe in yourself and keep on going. I think that will be my advice.
Yes. The taking the power to actually move through things, the belief, that's so powerful, without believing yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, that it stops somewhere and you take it further with that belief. So yeah, wonderful, beautiful message. Thank you for
Thank
that.
you.
And what's your next steps now? Like, is there, or where can people find you? Of course, you're on Instagram and on LinkedIn and so on, but is there anything coming up for you, or anywhere people should go online or anywhere to see your art? And you tell us.
Well, for now, I don't have any exhibitions which I'm planning in the nearest future. So fortunately, I cannot I cannot share that. But of course, my work is available on the website and on my social media. And now I'm working a little bit in a different direction. So I wanted to try a slightly different project, which I never tried before. So I just decided to make it a little bit more easy, and just, maybe just to have like, a different approach, not necessarily so like condense in a way, but also try to do things more simple and see wherever it's gonna lead me. So currently I'm working on that project, and I'm also looking into developing my network. So I'm applying for certain residencies, because that's what I'm quite excited about, and I never tried it before. And I believe that it can be a very great way to, like maybe give some refreshment to my artistic practice. So that's what I'm currently also busy with.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to hearing where you'll be having your residencies and for all your future projects. I'm also excited to find out about that. And of course, you are linked underneath this podcast, so everyone can find you now and find your links on LinkedIn or on Instagram or your website. And yeah, other than that, I'm really grateful to have had you on the show here today. Yeah, just thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Marie. It was a really great pleasure. I felt super easy and so relaxed. So I was quite, really happy that you invited me for this podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.